Alright, so everyone is calling the David Sachs press conference boring, saying nothing really happened. But here's the thing. If you were actually paying attention, this wasn't just another generic crypto update. This was a blueprint for where the US is taking digital assets. And trust me, the market is sleeping on it. We're talking about stablecoin regulation that could change everything, a potential Bitcoin strategic reserve, and even a sovereign wealth fund that might start scooping up crypto. If you thought this was just another political press conference, you're missing the big picture. So today, I'm breaking it all down. The key takeaways, why the market didn't react, and what this means for crypto moving forward. Stick around, because if you're holding Bitcoin, altcoins, or just trying to figure out where the space is headed, this is one video you don't want to miss. I'm Danny Lowe, and if you enjoy content that breaks things down and keeps you ahead of the game, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you stay updated with all the latest crypto insights. Alright, let's get into it. So let's talk about the actual David Sachs press conference, because if you just read the headlines or listened to people on Twitter, you'd think it was a total flop. But the reality? This was one of the most important signals we've gotten from the US government about crypto ever. For years, crypto in the US has been stuck in limbo. No clear regulations, endless lawsuits, and a government that seemed more interested in shutting things down than actually working with the industry. But now, we have the chair of the Senate Banking Committee, the chair of the House Financial Services Committee, and top government officials standing next to the crypto tsar himself, laying out a roadmap for digital assets. And here's what people completely missed. They aren't just talking about crypto anymore. They're actively working on it. Then there's the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve, something that sounds almost too bullish to be real, but it's actually on the table. One of the first things Sachs was instructed to evaluate is whether the US should start accumulating Bitcoin as a national reserve asset. This would have been completely unthinkable just a few years ago. If this actually happens, it's not just a win for Bitcoin. It could trigger a global arms race for Bitcoin accumulation, where every major country starts buying to avoid being left behind. And it gets even bigger. Buried in the press conference was another massive but overlooked point: the creation of a US sovereign wealth fund that could include crypto investments. A sovereign wealth fund is essentially a massive pool of money controlled by the government that can be used to invest in strategic assets. And guess who's involved? Howard Lutnick, a guy who already owns millions in Bitcoin and has deep ties to traditional finance. This fund could buy Bitcoin, Ethereum, or even crypto infrastructure projects, opening the door for institutional scale government-backed crypto investments. The shift happening here is massive. The US isn't banning crypto, it's positioning itself to dominate it. Instead of fighting stablecoins, they want the dollar to be the default currency of blockchain finance. Instead of ignoring Bitcoin, they're considering making it a national reserve asset. And instead of leaving crypto to hedge funds and retail investors, they're floating the idea of a government-backed fund buying in directly. This is a complete shift in strategy from the last 10 years. Instead of fighting Bitcoin and stablecoins, they're realizing that if they don't lead the space, somebody else will. Whether it's China, Russia, or even smaller players like El Salvador and Hong Kong, who are already building their own reserves. And yet, the market didn't even blink. You'd think that with everything we just talked about, stablecoin regulations, a potential Bitcoin strategic reserve, and a sovereign wealth fund, that the market would have exploded on the news. But instead, nothing. Bitcoin barely moved. Altcoins continued their slow bleed, and most people shrugged off the press conference like it never even really happened. So, what's going on? Well, this is a classic case of market exhaustion, a point where even objectively bullish news doesn't trigger any major price movement. It's not that this news wasn't important, it's just buyers are tapped out, sentiment is worn down, and the market has been beaten into numbness. We've seen this happen before in past cycles. At a certain point, when everyone who wants to buy in is already deployed, the market stops reacting to good news. The real problem? It still reacts to bad news, and hard. Look at what happened just a few weeks ago. The moment we got negative headlines, whether it was tariffs, inflation fears, or some regulatory uncertainty, the market dumped instantly, liquidating billions in leverage and sending people into full panic mode. But when we get actually positive catalysts, like the US government actively pivoting towards a pro-crypto stance, the market just shrugs. This is a dangerous sign because it tells us that liquidity is low, and most of the big players who are willing to buy have already done so. It also doesn't help that we're sitting in a post-alt season hangover where tons of liquidity has been drained. The last few months have been a cycle of meme coins launching every 30 seconds, low-effort AI projects sucking up capital, and old altcoins unlocking massive amounts of supply. Combine that with institutions locking up liquidity in Bitcoin ETFs instead of moving down the risk curve, and you get exactly what we're seeing now. A market that just isn't dead, but isn't reacting like it used to. This kind of exhaustion isn't a reason to panic, but it is a reality check. We're not in a phase where random coins pump 100x just because someone tweeted about them. We're in a market that's consolidating, shifting, and waiting for new inflows to arrive before it makes its next move. The US setting the stage for crypto dominance isn't something that plays out overnight. It's something that will creep up on people, and by the time they realize it, it'll already be priced in. Alright, so if the market didn't react now, does that mean that this press conference was a nothing burger? Absolutely not. In fact, this is probably the most important shift we've seen in US crypto policy ever. And here's why. For the past decade, the US government has had one of the most anti-crypto stances of any major economy. We've seen endless lawsuits, uncertain regulation, and a regulatory environment that pushed billion-dollar companies overseas. But now, the entire tone has changed. Instead of trying to kill crypto, the US is making a play to control it. And the strategy is brilliantly simple. Stablecoins first, Bitcoin second, everything else later. The biggest thing they're targeting is stablecoin dominance, because they've realized that the best way to maintain the US dollar's global power is by making sure it becomes a default currency on the blockchain. They know that if stablecoins like USDC and USDT are regulated and backed directly by the US financial system, it guarantees that trillions of dollars flow into crypto under their control, not China's, not Europe's, and definitely not any decentralized alternative. This is a direct response to what's happening globally. We've already seen China push its digital yuan, Hong Kong testing its own Bitcoin reserves, and even El Salvador quietly stacking Bitcoin in preparation for a shift in global finance. The US doesn't just want to join this race, they want to win it. And this is where Bitcoin comes in. The fact that a Bitcoin strategic reserve is even being discussed at the highest levels of government is a signal that the US isn't just thinking about regulation, they're thinking about accumulation. If they move forward with this plan, the US would be committing to buying Bitcoin as part of its national reserves, which would be a complete game changer. Not only would it force other countries to start accumulating Bitcoin to stay competitive, but it would kick off the biggest institutional Bitcoin rush we've ever seen. Then there's the Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is even crazier. If the US sets up a massive government-backed investment fund that includes Bitcoin and other digital assets, you now have a direct pipeline for institutional scale capital to flood into crypto under the full backing of the US government. This isn't some hypothetical concept. The people involved, like Howard Lutnick, are already massive Bitcoin holders. This fund wouldn't just be allowed to buy crypto, it would be run by people who want to buy crypto. So, what does all of this mean for altcoins? Because let's be real. While Bitcoin might be leading the charge in terms of adoption and institutional buying, most of the retail market is still chasing the next 10, 50, or 100x altcoin. But here's the reality. Not every altcoin is going to survive this cycle. In fact, this entire press conference just told us exactly which narratives are going to thrive and which ones are in trouble. First, let's address the elephant in the room. This is not 2021. The days of random tokens launching and instantly mooning because of hype alone, they're most likely over. There are way too many new tokens launching every day. Liquidity is being spread too thin, and the market just doesn't have the same appetite for endless speculation. On top of all this, we're still looking at billions in token unlocks in 2025 and even more billions in 2026, meaning a flood of new supply is still coming into the market. So, if you're just sitting around and waiting for some massive altcoin season where everything pumps at once, you're going to be waiting a very long time. Instead, what we're seeing is a more selective, narrative-driven market. Certain sectors are going to explode, while others get completely left behind. And the press conference just told us exactly which sectors the US is prioritizing. The first big winner? Stablecoin infrastructure. If the US is serious about bringing trillions of dollars on-chain through regulated stablecoins, projects that facilitate stablecoin movement, liquidity, and on-chain settlement are going to benefit massively. Now, you can't directly invest into USDT or USDC, but protocols that enable stablecoin trading, cross-chain movement, and DeFi integrations are all in prime position. Then there's real-world assets or RWA, probably the single biggest long-term narrative that will come out of this cycle. The second stablecoin regulation is in place. Institutions and high net worth individuals are going to start looking for ways to generate yield on chain. This is where RWA projects, tokenized treasuries, real estate, equities, and other off-chain assets become a $1 trillion market. We're already seeing major institutions pushing for this, and if the US backs it with regulation, it's going to explode. And of course, Bitcoin itself is an obvious winner. If the US starts accumulating Bitcoin as part of its national reserve, that is a clear sign that Bitcoin is entering a completely different phase of adoption. This isn't just about ETFs anymore. Governments are going to be buying. And when governments start buying, you want to be holding before that trend kicks off. But here's the harsh truth. Most altcoins just won't make it. If you're still holding on to low liquidity, low utility tokens expecting them to suddenly pump, you're gambling. This cycle isn't about throwing money at everything and just hoping something sticks. It's about being in the right sectors, the right narratives, and the projects that are actually positioned to thrive. So, instead of asking when alt season is coming, the better question is, are you in the right tokens for what's coming next? Let's be real. On the surface, this press conference wasn't flashy, but the moves being set in motion are massive. The US isn't just talking about crypto anymore. They're positioning themselves to dominate it, starting with stablecoins, followed by Bitcoin reserves, and now even floating the idea of a sovereign wealth fund getting into digital assets. The market might not have reacted yet, but this is the kind of foundational shift that creeps up on people. By the time most investors realize what's happening, it'll already be priced in. The real question is, are you paying attention, or are you waiting for the headlines to tell you what to do? Drop a comment below. What do you think? Is the US actually serious about crypto, or is this all just political posturing? Let's talk about it. And if you haven't already, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because this is just the beginning. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.